And the Trump administration has moved swiftly to scale back, reverse, and dismantle various guardrails that protect Americans from corruption. We have now a plane that he's accepting by a foreign government. His family's doing business deals with a foreign government. And your office has authorized Elon Musk's company Starlink to do business in at least 5 African countries and many, many others. My question is, with the dismantling of the enforcement of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and many other things, what efforts are you doing as Secretary of State to make sure that our government is free from improper foreign influence over our policy?
I mean, the examples you've given, Starlink's all over the world. There isn't a country in the world now that doesn't have Starlink for the most part. They have Starlink in Syria. We certainly didn't help them land that deal, but they've got Starlink's a global company that's present everywhere and continues to grow because they provide a very unique service no one else provides. I'm not aware of any plane that's been given. I know the media reports about it. I know that the Air Force One that's scheduled to be delivered is like 5 years off balance. So they went to Boeing, and this is the extent of what I know about this plane. I've never seen it. They went to Boeing and said, are there any planes that fit the bill? Boeing produced a list of planes that they'd sold over the last few years. One of them happened to be a Qatar. You'd have to ask the Department of Defense because that would go to the Air Force. That would not come to the State Department. Beyond that, look, we're involved in helping businesses expand all over the world. There isn't a single day that we aren't involved in helping an American company gain access to a market, and we'll continue to do so. As far as people involved in our government that are doing that, I'm not aware of anyone on the cabinet or in the President's White House that's using the State Department to expand their personal portfolio. And if there are, we wouldn't help them do that. But no one's ever asked us to do that. So I think we're following the law with regards to what we're doing to prevent corruption.
So is the answer?
Chair recognizes Representative Smith from New Jersey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, it was an honor, Mr. Secretary, to serve with you as co-chair of the China Commission. We did so much together. I want to thank you for that leadership. It was extraordinary. I want to thank you for bringing the DR Congo and Rwanda together on April 25th for that statement of principles. You are tenaciously pursuing peace all over the planet, including in DR Congo, where the fighting is very intense, and has been. And of course, tomorrow I have a big hearing on Congo, on Sudan, and I know you're trying to do everything you can to try to mitigate the horrific violence that is occurring there. Let me just ask you a couple of questions, if I could. I had a hearing on Aliyev and Azerbaijan on the Tom Lantos Commission, and it's very clear that after the genocide committed by Aliyev against the Armenians, that there are many, many political prisoners and POWs being held. I would just encourage you to do whatever you can to get those men and women released, at least 300. I met with Aliyev twice in Baku. He's a dictator. I know we work with dictators and we have to have at least some kind of conversation with them, but release those prisoners. They're being maltreated and horribly mistreated by Aliyev, so I would ask for that. Secondly, you and I have worked on issues like forced organ harvesting. You and Tom Cotton were the prime sponsors of a bill on the Senate side. 2 weeks ago, we got the bill passed here again. It is a horrific human rights abuse by Xi Jinping, targeting the Uyghurs, of course, the Muslim Uyghurs, because those organs are being sold in the Middle East. So they want to have livers that are coming from a Muslim. So the market is very, very high, livers and other internal organs. And Xi Jinping is making billions by killing tens of thousands of young people, average age 28, each and every year. Falun Gong, and you know it, you're the sponsor of the bill. I would appeal to you, if you could. It passed the House 406-1. If we could get it out of the Senate, it would hopefully clamp down on this egregious human rights abuse in China. And it's a global bill. It would outlaw forced organ harvesting profoundly, with real penalties up to 20 years in prison for those who are part of that supply chain. But it would most directly affect Xi Jinping and the people who are doing this horrific abuse. I yield.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. On obviously the organ harvesting, China plays a concerning role in that regard, and we would obviously be helpful in any way we can in helping you pass that in the Senate, certainly putting a good word for it and the like. But it's not limited to China, unfortunately. There are other parts of the world where we're now seeing that, and there are places where we're trying to verify, but we hear reports of that. And that's something that's need to be called out as well. As far as Azerbaijan is concerned, our core focus has been on trying to establish a peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia. There's a real risk there of a conflict that we're trying to prevent from happening. Our teams have been very engaged in that regard and trying to make something come about and prevent an armed intervention there that would, and obviously within the context of those conversations. The issues you raised about prisoners and human rights are critical to it. And again, another example of where we want to use our embassies. So when we talk about people will complain, well, you got rid of the Human Rights Office and the functional bureaus, it's because it's being transferred to the regional bureaus. And our regional bureaus will not just have a focus on human rights within the bureau, but so will our embassy. And so that is the human rights issue with regards to Azerbaijan, and so that is what our embassy will be focused on pushing. It's different from what the human rights issue might be in another part of the world, but we think it's important to have people on the front line prioritizing these issues as part of our holistic approach. You've outlined it correctly. We do want to have, we may not agree with the system of government, we may wish it were different. But the truth of the matter is that we have to deal with countries in many cases that perhaps don't have ideal models, but we have to deal with them in our national interest, and we need to balance all of these things together, our national interest and diplomacy, without surrendering and finding opportunities to further interests such as human rights. And Azerbaijan provides us an opportunity to do that in the context of the broader peace that we're trying to establish there.
Finally, almost out of time, yesterday I chaired a hearing on the global problem of anti-Semitism and how it's getting worse. It was my 18th hearing on it. We had Ted Deutsch, who is at the leader, was a leader here when he was in Congress, as one of our witnesses. And I just want to say thank you for what you're doing vis-a-vis Israel and what you're doing to try to stop this scourge of anti-Semitism that is exploding, especially at the United Nations, where the UN Human Rights Council is filled to overflowing with people in agency positions, not just the members of it, who are absolutely anti-Semitic. So I want to thank you for that as well.
Chair now recognizes Representative Sherman.
We all miss Jerry Conley, and I do not think that he would want us to be passive in our questioning here today. Mr. Chairman, it's our job to oversee the State Department. You can't do that by having think tank witnesses come before us. Our job isn't to oversee the think tanks. In 2023, we had 44 government witnesses. This year, we have our first. And I hope very much that we have all not only the secretary, but the undersecretaries and assistant secretaries so that we can really do our job. Secretary Rubio, in the 1970s, there was a powerful Middle East monarch who claimed to be a friend of the United States, may very well have been, claimed to be at least agreeable to Israel. And so in the 1970s, we transferred enormous sophisticated weapons to him. In 1979, the Shah was deposed and all those weapons were in the hands of the Ayatollah. Today, MBS wants a nuclear weapon. But he says what he wants is a nuclear cooperation agreement. Well, we have a nuclear cooperation agreement with the United Arab Emirates and Turkey and Morocco that all provide for a gold standard of safety. Can you assure us that you will not enter into a nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia that does not have that same gold standard of security to make sure they're not building a nuclear weapon?
Well, first I will tell you that there has been no conversation about entering into one. For example, during the recent trip.
Can you, I've got limited time.
I can't. So here's the thing. I can
Sir,
tell you.
either give me a yes, give me a no.
Well, I'm going to give you
on.
my answer if you want my answer.
I want a yes
this is not
or
a game
no.
show.
Reclaiming my time.
Well, reclaim your time, but it's not a game show. I get to answer. These are complex questions. Let me answer.
Mr. Secretary, I'm reclaiming my time. The filibustering
means,
takes place in the Senate, not here.
I'm not filibustering. I'm trying to answer your question.
You're trying. Let's go on to the next question. With regard to Iran, can you assure us that you will continue sanctions on Iran until they verifiably agree to abandon all enrichment? That's a yes or no question.
No, it's not.
Well, can you give me a yes or no, or should I go on to the next question?
We believe that Iran should not be allowed to enrich uranium. Correct.
You believe that it should? Yeah,
We believe that an acceptable deal with Iran is one in which they cannot enrich, because if they can enrich, they can weaponize.
I know why we don't want. I asked you, will we agree? Will we continue the sanctions until they verifiably agree to get rid of?
Oh, you
the
have no
enrichments?
worry about us. The worry was the previous administration. This administration
Sir,
has
your
been
refusal to give me an answer is loud and clear.
No, well, I'd like
is
to answer your
reclaiming
question.
my time. Mr. Chair, you told us about all these wonderful business deals that were announced in the Middle East. It's reminiscent of the first year of the first term of Donald Trump, where he announced a $10 billion investment by Foxconn in Wisconsin. It is still an empty field. I am sure that the only deals announced in the Middle East that will actually happen were the bribery deals, the $400 million plane and the $2 billion Abu Dhabi will put into the cryptocurrency sponsored by Mr. Trump. TikTok. Mr. Secretary, you led the effort to say that it shouldn't be controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. We passed a law with your help. That law requires that we ban TikTok now because all of the expiration dates have expired. But instead, we saw Chinese interests affiliated with TikTok transfer $300 million into the Trump coin, which is a pure gift. It's $300 million for nothing but monopoly money. And so there's a word in Mandarin for this. It's called bribery. And it raises the question that I'll ask you to respond to for the record, and that is there any statute this administration will not violate for a $300 million Chinese bribe? We next focus on USAID. Musk gutted it. He said no one died as a result. Do you agree that no one has died yet as a result of the chainsawing of USAID? Yes or no?
I'm sorry, the question is, has anyone what?
Has anyone in the world died because of what Elon Musk did?
Listen,
yes or no, reclaiming my time. If you won't answer, that's a loud answer.
No one has died because of USAID.
The people who have died as a
lie.
result of cutting off the oxygen of a woman in Burma and denying HIV/AIDS treatment to those in Africa. They are dead now at the hands of Elon Musk and his co-conspirators.
Chair now recognizes Representative Wilson from South Carolina.
Thank you, Chairman Brian Mast, for your leadership holding this hearing at a very critical time where dictators with rule of gun are invading democracies with rule of law. And my sympathy for the Connolly family, as I was always cherished my friendship with who I call Mr. President Jerry Connolly. Mr. Secretary, congratulations on your success on behalf of the American people to implement the policies of President Donald Trump. Sadly, as you address problems that have plagued the department, bureaucrats in the past have undermined the agenda of the president. It was historic to have, as you just cited, the announcement of President Trump to lift sanctions, giving Syria a chance, which was welcomed by a standing ovation in Riyadh, which was so historic. And now the progress that you've made, instead of billboards, electronic billboards of the dictator of Assad, they've been replaced by billboards praising Donald Trump and praising the Crown Prince. What an incredible change in 6 months to go from dictator to a potential of democracy. With that in mind, I have concerns that there could be efforts to undermine. And so will you be working in every way to have full executive authorities to carry out the president's orders rather than a phased approach? In addition, can we lift the specific export controls on Syria?
Yeah, well, as you know, the sanctions in Syria are largely based on a statute, the Caesar Act. And so that allows the president to do rolling waivers, I believe, 6 months at a time. So the goal is ultimately to make enough progress so that Congress will permanently repeal those. In the interim, what we want to make sure is that the sanctions relief that we're providing allow our partners in the region to begin the aid flow that they want to do without running afoul of the sanctions. So that's what we're focused on executing, even as we speak. There was a meeting on it yesterday. It's in execution today as well.
Well, again, thank you for your leadership and insight to see how quickly that should have been done. I'm also grateful for the strong position of the Trump administration in regard to the anti-American Georgian Dream regime in the Republic of Georgia. They rigged the election in Georgia on October 26. They've criminalized association with America. They kicked out American companies blocking trade and mineral access to the Middle Corridor, selling Georgia to the Chinese Communist Party. They've repeatedly smeared President Trump and American leadership. With that in mind, I'm really grateful that actually with the Rondelli Foundation, there's been a report just released indicating the control by the Chinese Communist Party now in the Republic of Georgia, and I'd like to provide this for the record. Additionally, for 200 consecutive days, freedom-loving Georgians have heroically taken to the street, embracing themselves in American flags and carrying posters of the president. Under your leadership, what will be done to help the State Department impose real cost on the anti-American Georgian dream on behalf of the people of Georgia?
Well, going back to what I said earlier in my opening statement, the goal of the United States is our national interest. So we will look at that and say, is it our national interest to have an anti-American government governing an important part of the world? And if not, we'll take appropriate actions to impose costs on that government. That's currently under review, and we're looking for options and additional options. I have no announcement today specifically on what we plan to do yet, but I can tell you that that is something that's being discussed. And again, a great example of why we're going to look to our regional bureaus and our local office on the ground there to provide us guidance as to what are the measures that the government, the anti-American government, would be most responsive to.
And it's so refreshing to get your response. And additionally, another issue is Kurdistan, the regional government of Iraq. And they have recently signed an agreement with American oil companies for the exploration and for the development of the oil capabilities, billions of dollars in northern Iraq. But sadly, the regime in Tehran has impacted Baghdad and is actually controlling the actions of Baghdad. And so Iran is intruding in trying to stop the agreements. What is being done to promote freedom for the ability of Kurdistan to, in regional government, to really support the people of Iraq?
Well, we first have made clear the linchpin of our approach towards Iraq is that autonomy that the Kurdish population has in that part of the country, and part of that is allowing them the economic lifeline that allows them to prosper and succeed. The Iraqi officials have expressed an interest in a closer, better relationship with the United States, and we've explained to them that the core to that is respect for the companies that are operating from in that country, from our country operating within Iraq. Also, respect, as I said, for the autonomy of the Kurds. And third is the Iranian influence. And the Iranian influence there has continued to grow, unfortunately, in some sectors of their elected government, and poses a grave danger to the United States, including in the form of pro-Iran Shia militias, who have in the past struck against the United States and have expressed interest in doing so again in the future. That's unacceptable, and that has to be addressed.
Congratulations on your success. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Representative Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will miss my seatmate, Jerry Conley. He loved sitting here, and we loved him. Secretary, in 1944, my uncle, James Arthur Keating, was serving in France, and as soldiers, his fellow soldiers were dying around him, he wrote a letter back in combat, back home, about the cost of human sacrifice and whether it was worthwhile to defend a piece of mud on the earth. Only a week after that letter, he answered that question while carrying lead in himself, as one of the people in his command was exposed and injured. He was wounded himself carrying lead and crawled out there, brought him back to safety, saved his life, and as he was going for another person, was machine gunned to death himself and killed in action. 400,000 other American families gave the same sacrifice, but the peace and prosperity that came forward in the world has never seen. It's a transatlantic alliance where our allies sacrificed their young men and women when America was attacked in 9/11, and economically, they're a $1.6 trillion trading partner with us with 16 million jobs on both sides of the continent. So my questions today are looking for clarity on where we stand with our allies and partners for more than 80 years, because they're expressing their doubts. They're expressing their doubts publicly. They've expressed it to me privately. So as the face of our country, as the lead foreign policy representative in the United States, I'm just looking for this clarity. So first, simply answer this question, if you will. Is Russia the aggressor in this Ukraine war?
Yeah, Russia invaded Ukraine.
So they are the aggressor in this war, correct?
They invaded them, yes.
Well, thank you, sir, because it's important to get this clarity, because President Donald Trump said it was Ukraine that started this war, and our allies have the right to know this. Secondly, the person we're negotiating with, Vladimir Putin, is he a war criminal?
Well, I think you can look at instances that have happened there and certainly characterize them as war crimes, but our intent is to end the war.
Is he a war criminal?
We can't end the war without talking to Mr. Putin.
That's pretty simple. Is he a war criminal?
Well, that's
this man we're negotiating with, Vladimir Putin. Is he a war criminal? That's not tough.
But what? I'm trying to answer your question by telling you that we're trying to end the war here.
Go ahead.
No, it's not a simple answer.
You are equivocating, sir. Just answer the question.
I'm answering your question, and the answer is that war crimes have been committed, no doubt. And who is responsible for that? There will be time and place for that accountability. But right now, the job is to end the war.
So you won't answer the question.
If we don't end the war, people are going to get
Reclaiming
killed.
my time, sir, let me go on. Because I don't understand this. Because you're sitting in front of us now as Secretary of State. It wasn't long ago that you were sitting as a senator with Secretary of State nominee Rex Tillerson at the time, in the exact same circumstances, only reversed, and you questioned him about Putin directing attacks against schools, markets, hospitals, playgrounds, and on top of this, in this instance, he's abducted 20,000 children, a clear war crime. So you were very clear then Vladimir Putin was a war criminal. Now you're unmaking him a war criminal, and you won't answer the question about the exact same circumstances.
You're putting words in my mouth.
I'm reclaiming my time, sir.
You're putting words in my mouth.
And you know what you said to Secretary Tillerson at the end of his answer when he equivocated just as you are right now?
I've not equivocated.
You said,
you just don't let me
sure
answer.
Sounds like it to me. Then I'll give you a second chance. Is Vladimir
never gave me a
Putin
first
a
chance.
war criminal?
I already told you war crimes have been committed.
No, you didn't tell me if
Well,
he's
I
a
can't
war
even-
criminal.
Mr. Chairman, am I allowed to answer questions?
I'm
or just
reclaiming
be
my
hectored?
time, sir, and listen,
Well,
I'm
he
using
keeps
your own
reclaiming
words
it.
so you don't have to answer. Did you know what you said to then nominee Secretary of State Tillerson? You said you were very discouraged in his inability to accept that Putin was indeed a war criminal. Your words, we don't need any more. You're inconsistent. The third question I have, sir, is this.
I answered your question. You just don't let
You
me
did
answer.
not answer the question about Putin's
Well, you
war
keep
criminal
reclaiming your
conduct
time.
in Ukraine.
You ask me a question, then you reclaim your time. So how can I answer
You
the
answered
question?
it. Listen, let me go forward with this. 3 questions. And I'm
Or are you
being
gonna
pretty
reclaim
clear to
time
you.
on those two?
I'm giving you a chance to answer. Give me a chance to ask the question. Here it is. So there's a concern among these allies that we've had, our closest allies, about the one-sidedness of the negotiations with Russia and Ukraine.
Gentlemen's
Regular
time has
order.
expired. Secretary Rubio, if you'd like to respond, by all means.
Can I reclaim my time for a few seconds? Thank you. Number one, crimes have been committed in the war on Ukraine, and there will be accountability for that. But our goal right now is to end that war, because let me tell you, every single day that that war goes on, more people are killed, more people are maimed, and frankly, more war crimes are being committed every day that the war lasts. Number one. Number two, I don't know how European allies could say that. I talk to European allies literally every single day. I see or talk to the foreign minister of the UK and France and Germany more than I see or talk to my own kids in some days.
Chairman,
So these are all
I'm
false
reclaiming my
claims.
time now.
You have no time.
Because
You're not
you've given him
recognized, Mr.
time,
Keating.
and I ask unanimous
Not
consent.
recognized, Mr. Keating.
Chairman,
You're not recognized.
I'm asking for unanimous consent to
Mr.
put in
Keating,
the record.
you're not recognized. The
I
Secretary
am
is speaking.
asking unanimous consent to put in the record
Mr. Keating, you're not
the
recognized.
op-ed. Oh, so you're not going to recognize, Mr. Chairman?
Not
Point of order.
recognized in this
Anyone
moment.
that asks unanimous consent to put in for the record a document,
Keating,
you're not allowing
you
that?
are not recognized right now. Your time expired. You might have a minute and a few. Mr. Secretary, please continue.
The last point is our goal is to end this war. We have to be able to talk to both
Point of
sides
order,
in order
Mr.
to do it.
Chairman.
In order to be, we have to end this
My
conflict.
time is answered. His time answering my question ended too. It's the next person's time. That's the rules in this committee. When you
Secretary,
won't even
please
let a
continue.
person enter into the record something from our ambassador till recently from Ukraine, Ambassador Brink,
Mr.
who
Keating
resigned
should-
because of the conduct
Keating,
of
you
this
should keep a
administration
better eye of the clock
after
right in front
30
of you.
years of service, sir.
You should keep a better eye of the clock in front of you. Your time expired. Continue.
Our goal is to end this war so more people don't die. And by the way, we want all those kids returned back to their homes that were kidnapped from their parents. We just want people to stop dying. Every day this war goes on, people die, things are destroyed, and lives are ruined. And we want it to stop.
Thank you, Secretary. Did you have something you want to submit for unanimous consent?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now would be your opportunity.
Thank you, sir. I want to submit for the record an op-ed by Ambassador Brink from Ukraine, the regional ambassador that was close until recently, 30 years of service of Democrat presidents and Republican ones. It's an op-ed that says
So ordered.
Trump's Ukraine
Representative Weiss is
policy left me no
recognized.
choice, and she details how
So
peace
ordered.
at any cost is
Take yes
appeasement,
for an
not
answer.
peace.
So
Thank
ordered.
you, sir.
Representative Weiss is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that the accomplishments of the Secretary of State in the first 100 days be placed in the record.
So ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, good to see you again. We're holding up just some of those. You probably recognize what you've done for 100 days. It is absolutely amazing. that you've done all of that. And as you said in your opening statement, it's our job in reauthorization to make many of them permanent. I share with you the fact that for decades, the division of USAID, sometimes in the embassy, sometimes out, coordinating sometimes, often not, populated by people who left state to go to aid, but then weren't treated the same. All of that had to end, and I really appreciate your doing it, and I look forward to making that permanent. I want to just ask you a few questions, and some of them go to the previous questioner. Is Vladimir Putin the undeniable head of a country that has as many, basically, ability to bomb us into oblivion with nukes as any other country on Earth?
They have the largest, I believe, the largest strategic weapons stockpile in the world and one of the largest tactical nuclear weapons stockpiles.
And he's the undeniable leader.
Correct.
Is one of the things that every Secretary of State keeps in their mind that peace is never made with your friends, but rather with your enemies?
Well, it's one of the reasons why, irrespective of Ukraine, there has to be some level of communication between the United States and Moscow. It's frankly irresponsible to not have the two biggest nuclear powers on the planet communicating, which was the case for 3 years. That doesn't mean we're going to be allies or friendly unless conditions change, but we have to at least be able to communicate with them to prevent miscalculation and war.
And wasn't it true during the entire Cold War, president after president of both parties and secretary after secretary had to and did retain relations with the Soviet Union, up to and including President Reagan's famous negotiations that essentially led to the end of the Cold War?
If there had not been communications between the U.S. and Russia in 1961, the world could have ended during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Now, on that list behind me, there's a lot of taking and combining and so on. But I have two things I want to ask you about. One is, do you have a vision for OBO that would cause it to catch up and to reach a point where our embassies, consulates, and other facilities would never again lead to something like we've had at Benghazi and other occurrences where substandard facilities led to the loss of life?
Well, absolutely, it's our priority. In fact, every single day, we have a team that watches our mission posture around the world, not just because of the physical layout, but what the conditions are on the ground. Remember, in many of these posts, in many cases, we are very dependent on local forces and their ability to protect from the perimeter, what they're willing to offer. And so, as you recall, in Benghazi, one of the challenges we faced is we relied on local militias to provide perimeter security. When they abandoned their post, it left the consulate and vulnerable and ultimately led to loss of life. So as part of our analysis, clearly the physical layout and the protection, it's something we've watched very closely in places like Somalia, where we were lacking overhead protection in some cases, but also we are always looking at the capability and willingness of local liaison partners on the ground from the host government to provide their end of it. The less security they're able to provide us assurances on, the more nervous and concerned we become about our force posture or about our presence in any given country.
Now, Mr. Secretary, as you recall, during the first Trump administration, the President nominated me for the Trade Development Agency, and I kindly appreciate the fact that you were willing to support me if I'd ever gotten the actual vote. It is a small organization, a small part of our outreach to compete against Belt and Road. USAID could be part of that. Obviously, XM Bank, a host of other entities could be part of it. But in your opinion today, even with the changes you've made, are we or are we not positioned to properly address, to provide complete packages to compete against Belt and Road?
Well, first of all, Belt and Road is largely a series of loans and other traps that are provided that you hire Chinese companies to come into your country and build a road or build a bridge or build a stadium or build whatever they want. That's actually not comparable to USAID, which is more humanitarian and development assistance, but it's in the form of a grant. That's more loaning on their part. I think the two entities that are best positioned to act as alternatives are the Development Finance Corporation, which is currently potentially could be expanded in my view, and then Millennium, which is undergoing a review for improvements. But I think both of these offer better alternatives in terms of comparison to or a way to compete against Belt and Road Initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Yield back.
Chair now recognizes Representative Barra.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this Inspector General report about the impact of USAID
Sword.
Golden State. Mr. Secretary, I did not get the chance to know you while you were in the Senate, but like you did, I also have traveled a lot to Africa, have seen firsthand the gratitude of lives that we've saved. You know, after the Ebola crisis in 2014, had a chance to visit villages in Sierra Leone, and just the joy and thanks to the United States. You know, in 2015, you stated this, and again, foreign aid is less than 1% of our budget, but foreign aid can make a difference when properly used. And if you ever have a chance, travel to the African continent and you will meet people who are alive today because the American taxpayer funded antiviral HIV medications that kept them alive. It will not be easy to radicalize people who are alive because the American taxpayer saved their lives and the lives of their children. Do you still stand by that statement?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's why we're still going to do foreign aid.
Great. So that's incredibly important. As a young doctor in the 1990s, I took care of a lot of people that were dying of HIV and AIDS. It is a painful death. What I hear on the ground in Africa is that these medications aren't getting to folks, that some of the folks that deliver the medications aren't getting to folks and people are dying. We need to do what we did under President Bush with PEPFAR. We've saved over 25 million lives. Nearly 8 million babies are alive today because we prevented them from getting HIV/AIDS. I want to work with you to make sure we continue doing that. That is the goodness of the American people. I'm a little bit older than some of the people on this committee. I grew up looking at pictures of kids that were starving in the 80s. Part of the reason why I became a doctor, part of the reason why I'm on this committee and why I've focused so much on health, nutrition, food aid, is because of pictures like that that are embedded in my mind as a kid. We came together as a country. Part of what moral clarity of the United States is we are a country of abundance. President Trump may not think this is in our national security interest, but I think it is in our faith interest. It is who we are as a spiritual nation, as a faith-based nation. We worry about that. We care about relieving starvation and so forth. We've got to do more because I talk to the faith-based groups, I talk to our implementing partners, I read the news stories. I do not want to see more pictures like this coming out, and I'm definitely afraid in the next 30 days, 60 days, 2 years, 4 years, we're going to see more death and starvation because nobody else can do what we do as the United States of America. I'd like your commitment that you will work with us to make sure we continue providing food aid, that we continue doing what we do best based on our moral clarity. Can I have your commitment on that?
Yeah, in fact, that's why we're going to have a humanitarian fund within the Department of State that's going to provide the humanitarian system that you've outlined. And we're still going to be by far the largest donor in the world to humanitarian assistance.
And you'll continue to work with this committee, work with us in a bipartisan way, in a bicameral way, to do what we do best. Nobody can do what the United States does.
That's my hope, to be able to continue to work with you in that way. We want to see humanitarian aid. We're going to do more of it than anybody on the planet.
Great. Let's save lives. With that, let me yield the remainder of my time to my colleague from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
I thank you, Representative Vera, and God bless Jerry Connolly. Mr. Secretary, you and I had the great privilege this past Sunday of traveling to the installation of Pope Leo, where he encouraged us to choose love and help the world's poorest. He suggests that we should get proximate to the suffering. If I were to tell you, Mr. Secretary, that outside that door was a 3-year-old little girl starving, like that photograph, ribs protruding, weak, unable to speak, what would you do?
Whatever anybody would do, we would try to help her.
I agree. I would too.
And that's what we do more than anybody in the world.
Anybody would do that. We would go out that door and help that little child. It's your humanity that calls you to do that, to save a single life. Mr. Secretary, Gaza is starving. As of last week, the UN has confirmed, at least 57 children have already died of malnutrition and 14,000 more are on the brink of starvation. Food sits just beyond the border for days, for weeks. It was cut off. Please hold the clock for me. Reclaiming my time. I understand they're upset. For days, for weeks, I asked that I could reclaim some of that time that was just interrupted.
We'll give you 5 seconds.
5?
Additional.
Innocent children are dying. Mr. Secretary, Pope Leo has called for an end to the blockade to humanitarian aid, which began by Mr. Netanyahu March the 2nd. He said, the Pope said, the price is being paid by children, the elderly, and the sick. Secretary Rubio, I call upon you and I ask for your affirmation of this. Stand by our faith, by the call of the Pope to save the children desperate for food and water, babies who have no way to feed themselves, mothers who have to watch them die. Stand by the Jewish faith. Their teaching tells us to save a single life is to save the whole universe. Will you commit to getting a surge of aid into Gaza now?
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Maybe the
Chair now
Secretary...
recognizes
maybe the
Representative
Secretary
Burchett
could
from
answer-
Tennessee.
Mr. Chairman, could the Secretary answer my question? It's a yes or no.
I don't think you got a question out, and I gave
did.
you additional time.
Oh,
Chair
well,
recognizes
somebody-
Representative Burchett from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, how do you plan to ensure that future foreign assistance funding decisions are aligned with the President and are not co-opted or watered down by entrenched Foreign Service bureaucrats?
I'm going to get to your question, Dimitri. If I could just take 5 seconds. We have asked the Israelis, and I think they've acknowledged this publicly, to allow more aid to flow. I actually met with the World Food Program in Rome this weekend while I was there. We believe they have a system in place for distribution. We'll continue to urge them to do so, and in fact, we expect more aid will begin to flow rapidly over the next few days into Gaza.
I thank you.
As far as your question about entrenched Foreign Service officers, actually, I want to be fair here. I have found the Foreign Service officers, by and large, the professional Foreign Service officers, to be very competent, professional, wanting to deliver on the mission, and to the extent they're frustrated in many cases is that they feel impeded by bureaucracy or by layers and layers of bureaucracy. People don't join the Foreign Service to get rich. They know they're doing it for service, and it's rewarding. Like in any organization, you're going to have people that stand in the way or are not aligned with the mission. And it's our responsibility to ensure that those people are not in a position to impede us. But we can't do the work at the State Department without our professional Foreign Service officers. And frankly, they're the ones we're empowering. And so ultimately what we want to return to, however, is a Foreign Service officer corps that's promoted and rewarded on the basis of merit, on how well you do your job. And sometimes, by the way, that means promoting someone who maybe doesn't have as many years experience. Maybe they've only been there 10 years instead of 20, but they're really good. And if you don't promote them, we're going to lose them to the private sector or some other endeavor. So ultimately, it resides upon us, those of us in these positions, to ensure that our agencies are delivering on the President's foreign policy. The State Department is not an independent branch of government. We are part of the executive, and our job is to help the President formulate foreign policy and execute on it. And we're trying to give you a structure in this reorganization to do that.
You could have just said, put the best player in, Coach. That would have covered it, and I appreciate your answer, brother. Moving on, will the State Department classify the Taliban as a foreign terrorist organization?
Well, I believe that classification is now once again under review. As you know, we've had some success over the last few weeks in getting some Americans that were detained released. But we'll have some decisions to make. That designation ultimately will be based on a holistic approach to what we think our future policy is going to be with regards to Afghanistan. We're clearly aware of who they are and what they've done in the past. We'd like to see more cooperation from them on al-Qaeda and other elements in the country that we'd like to see targeted. So I think that's part of a tool set the President has as leverage to increase cooperation on their part.
Can we ensure that America won't be attacked by the Taliban or any of these other terrorist groups that are training or based in Afghanistan?
Well, that's what we need to ensure every single day. And obviously, DOD holds that primary responsibility. And there's a reason why we don't have a diplomatic presence in Afghanistan, is because we do not feel at this point like we could appropriately secure our personnel. But the President is keenly aware of the situation there. He was very involved in negotiating in his first presidency for a deal that kept Americans safe. And I think he's interested in arriving at one again to ensure Afghanistan never becomes a launch pad for external operations against Americans anywhere in the world, especially the homeland.
Thank you. Also, I've been working on a piece of legislation, House Resolution 260, for a couple of years. It basically defunds the Taliban. We found out through a fellow named Legend who fought on our side and another guy, Sean Ryan, Navy SEAL, that they're collecting around $40 million a week is what we've been told, and possibly up to a point of $5 billion from some State Department documents. I'm wondering if you all will support that bill and what it does. It aims to stop U.S. tax dollars from benefiting the Taliban.
Well, I haven't seen the bill. I certainly support the intent that you've outlined, and I also would say the President has issued an order which we have followed to suspend any aid that could possibly reach the hands of the Taliban, and that's been implemented.
Well, we're told that it possibly still is, and the President has voiced support of this legislation, and I would hope that you would review that. That's something that's been out for a while, and it needs to be stopped, put to rest at some point. I've also invited President Saleh of Afghanistan to meet with me and my colleagues, and I'm wondering if you all will facilitate his entry into the country to meet with us.
Well, ultimately, that will require a decision and a determination upon whether a visa should be granted for that visit. We're certainly happy to, if you've got an engagement that you think would be important and further the national interest, it's certainly something we would consider in terms of making that decision. You know, we've granted visas in the past to people that we're not necessarily enamored with because they're coming to the United Nations or for some other purpose. So we would want to work with you to learn more about the context of that visit, and we would consider it.
Sure. I would remind you and this body and the folks that are listening and watching this that $40 million may not be a whole heck of a lot of people in Washington, D.C., but I can assure you in East Tennessee that is a whole lot of money that we are probably providing our enemies every dadgum week, and I'd appreciate y'all's assistance with that. Y'all been great. You've accepted our...
expired.
Okay.
Chair now recognizes Representative Castro from Texas.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you for your testimony. I want to say at the beginning that I think that in terms of roles in the cabinet, that coming into your job, I think you're the most qualified cabinet member. In a cabinet that I think has otherwise been incompetent and unqualified. You and I are obviously of different political parties, but we share kind of a similar story. My grandmother, Victoria Castro, came to this country when she was 6 or 7 years old as an orphan because both her parents had died after the Mexican Revolution, and the closest relatives that could take her in were not in Mexico. They were in San Antonio. And when my grandmother came to Eagle Pass, Texas, the manifest that allowed her to come, there was a question that was asked on that document. And the question said, purpose for visit. And her relatives that were bringing her, they wrote in to live, that she was coming to live. You have an incredible family story of your parents and your grandfather coming from Cuba in the 1950s and maybe early 1960s, and a similar background of helping you and your siblings pursue their American dreams, just like my grandmother did for my mom and for us. But I feel like today, under the Trump administration, our grandparents may have ended up in a gulag or banished in Guantanamo, or like the girl that I visited with who was a U.S. citizen in Mexico a few weeks ago with a brain tumor, having her seizure medication seized at a CBP inland port. And her mom, who's undocumented Mexican, her caretaker, 24 hours a day, not allowed to come back with her to get treatment for her condition. And I want to ask you specifically about a policy decision where on February 5th, DHS Secretary Noem rescinded temporary protective status for Venezuelans. This same thing was used for 700,000 Cubans in the 1960s and 70s. And she stated that in consultation with the Department of State, assessed conditions in Venezuela and that there are, quote, notable improvements in several areas such as the economy, public health, and crime that allow for these nationals to be safely returned to their home countries. And you said as recently as a few years ago that returning and failing to renew TPS for Venezuelans would be, quote, very real death sentence for countless Venezuelans who have fled their country. That was a few years ago. And so I wanted to ask you, do you believe after everything that Maduro has done, and you and I have both condemned him, as I think almost everybody on this dais has, that TPS recipients forced to return to Venezuela will truly be safe in that country? And how do you justify the decision to send 350,000 people to Venezuela right now?
Well, 350,000 people have not been sent to Venezuela. I think you're referring to the TPS cancellation of the temporary status. So 2 points. Number one is, unfortunately, that blanket approval of TPS gave TPS, including to people that, frankly, we should not have allowed in this country, irrespective of what part of the world they came from. Number two is the hope that now people that have received TPS will apply through the asylum process. And I believe many of them, if not most of them, will have very credible asylum claims to make for the reason you've just outlined. I think the problematic is that when you do a blanket TPS, number one, it's supposed to be temporary. None of these TPSs ever go away. But number two, when you do a blanket, especially in a mass migration event, it is going to protect and cover people that, frankly, we should not have allowed into this country. The overwhelming
we're both part of the same Latino community. You're not saying that all 350,000 people were gang members, are you?
Of course not. The majority
are
not.
You saying
but
that
if 1,000 of them are, we got a big problem.
Well, yeah, but so because there is a very small group who are criminals, just like any group of Americans, you're saying that none of them get any due process? They're just automatically expelled?
No,
like
they
no
have a right
review,
to...
no nothing for any of their cases?
Well, again, it's not my department. We don't do asylum claims, but
well,
I can
but
tell
she
you they
said
can
she
apply for
consulted
asylum.
with you. She said that it was her decision and your decision, and a few years ago you said it was a death sentence.
Yeah, but the problem is the previous administration did a terrible job of vetting applicants for TPS. They just blanket approved it.
They did things that have been done in other administrations before.
But never in this
Republican
mass migration
and Democrat.
event. Look, the bottom line is, of course, the overwhelming majority of them are not gang members, and they will be able to apply for asylum, and they have a very credible claim.
I have
but
to
there
yield.
Are some that are, and
I have
they
to
need be
yield my
removed from our
remaining
country.
time. I got it. I got to yield my remaining time to Congresswoman Kamlager-Dove.
Thank you for that, Rep. Castro. I have a quick question. The World Cup and the Olympics are being hosted in both red and in blue districts across this country, but they are not going to be successful unless we get visas to all of the folks that are participating. This is a bipartisan priority. I just sent a letter to you along with Representative Kim and 50 other colleagues. I am glad that the President has directed this administration to make this a success. In that spirit of cooperation, are you committing to working with me to ensuring that these games are a success and that we're getting visas to those who need it?
100%.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Representative Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, great to see you. Thanks for being here. I want to talk to you about the United Nations Relief and Workers Agency. The claims are fantastic and horrific at the same time, long-standing, of mismanagement, of collusion with Hamas and the terrorist organization and terrorists in Hamas, the using of American tax dollars to promote terrorism, anti-Semitism, violence, rampant corruption throughout the United Nations Relief and Workers Agency and ties to Hamas. The simple question for you as our representative in the administration and for all the taxpayers, not only in the 10th District of Pennsylvania, but all across the country who find it intolerable that their tax money goes to support terrorism and the wanton killing of the Jewish people and the state of Israel, what concrete steps is this administration, are you vowing to take regarding the United Nations Relief and Workers?
Yeah, we're not working with them anymore. I mean,
are they going to continue to receive funding?
No,
really
I mean we're done with that. We're not distributing any more aid through that organization, especially because of the links in Gaza that you've outlined that have now been well documented.
And what is the administration doing vis-a-vis other countries that would wish to continue to support them? What is the United States doing with our clout, with our leadership role in trying to make sure that UNRWA no longer exists, because it is a tool of Hamas?
Well, we've made very clear we're done cooperating with them on this work, and we're not going to be involved in it. Obviously, other countries have sovereign decisions they make. I take your point that you want us to use our pressure, but the truth of the matter is no country contributes as much to these efforts as we do. And as a result, I think that gives us tremendous leverage to potentially find and create alternatives for the distribution of aid. And that's what we're working on actively now. It's one of the impediments to getting aid into Gaza as we speak. We want to find alternatives that are reliable, that will actually reach the people, but will not wind up in the hands of Hamas, who then turns it around and sells it at exorbitant prices on the black market to enrich themselves after they feed themselves. So we share your sentiments on this completely.
Appreciate your answer and your dedication to that. Again, the American taxpayers are sick of paying for terrorism. Let's turn to the State Department bureaucratic loyalty and my concern. Over a long period of time, the State Department co-opted in the 30s by many communists. It's well documented. If you know the history, let's be blunt, some of these people are still continue to act like communists, sabotaging our institutions and selling out our country. I'm wondering, frankly, what can be done about that to align the State Department with the goals of not only this administration, but the goals of the American people to promote America and Americanism.
Yeah, well, I think the first starts with what I've said from the very beginning of this hearing, and that is that the goal of our foreign policy is to further our national interest. You have to define what the national interest is, and then you have to make sure that the policies that you're pursuing are in furtherance of the national interest, not the global interest, not the international order, but what's in the interest of the United States. Sometimes cooperating with the global order is in the national interest. Many times, increasingly, it is not. As you see, these international institutions oftentimes have become places where we give all the money and then they work against us. And it's used as a forum for anti-Americanism. The second point is, and that's part of the reorganization is, and this is an important point, and I hear this in some of the criticisms, I don't know if people fully understand, I've made this point already, the Department of State is not another branch of government. We work for the President of the United States. The people elected the President. The President sets the foreign policy. Our job is to advise and provide options, but ultimately our job is to execute on the foreign policy of the President. And we are trying to organize the State Department to be able to do that as efficiently and as effectively as possible without having to check 40 boxes in a memo where someone you've never heard of and I've never heard of but's happened to work at the State Department has a veto power over our ability to pursue a presidential directive. Now, that will be true for this administration, and frankly, it'll be true for the next administration, be it a Republican or a Democrat one. But that's the way our republic functions. In our republic, the executive branch is headed by the president, who's elected by the people through the Electoral College, and our job is to deliver on the president's agenda. That's what I'm proud to do, and that's what we're going to continue to do, and that's the kind of State Department we're building to deliver on.
Appreciate that. And finally, Mr. Secretary, the President's emergency plan for AIDS relief, it's been over 20 years since we launched this program, and we poured billions of dollars into it. And while it's definitely saved lives, and we certainly appreciate that and we laud that, what's the future? And when do we transition full responsibility to the African nations to manage their own health programs as we struggle to manage our own and pay for our own in the United States of America?
First of all, 85% of recipients under PEPFAR are currently and still receiving their assistance. The second point you make is an important one, and that is the best foreign aid is foreign aid that ends, and it ends because you've either solved the problem or because you've given capacity to your local partners to solve the problem. And I do believe there needs to be a metric in PEPFAR and beyond that in all of our foreign aid to ensure that at some point it ends because the problem was solved or because the local partner now has the capacity to handle it on their own. We are a generous people, but we cannot be responsible for every problem on this planet. We can't afford it. And frankly, in this day and age, we have many priorities we need to balance if we're going to form the national interest.
Representative
Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You know, I keep hearing you say your job is to carry out the mission of the executive branch and the agenda of the president. It's kind of hard to figure out what the president's foreign policy is. It jumps around from Gaza being a resort area to we're going to help Ukraine or we're not. We're going to have tariffs on China or we're not. We're meddling in the Romanian election. I don't know how you figure out what the agenda is. Also, you say you want to make the State Department stronger, but everything we've seen coming from y'all is that you're dead set on kind of killing it or at least undermining American interests. I think you proposed an 84% budget cut, plans for widespread diplomatic closures, laying off staff across the board. I don't see how any of those things really makes us stronger and delivers for the American people. Now, I believe that jeopardizes our national security, but I want to ask you something a little more arcane, a little more specific to my district that has to do with some economic investments, and that's about tourism. You know, we've been working very hard to improve the visa services over the last few years. Seems to me what you're doing is going to undercut that and move us backwards. We're already seeing this as a problem in Las Vegas where tourists are down by 8% just in a few short months. And this problem is going to become more acute as we look to host the Olympics and we host the World Cup. So could I just ask you, are you planning to cut the Consular Affairs Bureau that does the visas by 15% like we're hearing?
No, consular affairs may actually even be expanded. And in fact, we are looking for ways to do double shifts in some of our embassies around the world because of the visa requirements. For example, if you haven't applied for a visa from Colombia already, you probably won't get here in time for the World Cup unless we go to double shifts. So we've even talked about reassigning Foreign Service officers, many of who are trained earlier in their career in consular services, to provide 24-hour presence in some of our embassies and consulates around the world just to handle the visa load for things like the World Cup, the FIFA World Cup, the FIFA Club Cup, and then the Olympics 2 years behind it.
How How
ahead.
are you going to do that with an 84% budget cut?
There's no 84%, but I think you're referring to USAID when it comes to the State
I know that's
Department.
part of it, but just
Yeah,
generally.
but when it comes to the State Department, our consular services are actually intend on ramping up efforts because of the reasons that I've just outlined below, because of the reasons I just outlined earlier. And we recognize that as a top priority. We want it to be a success. It's a priority for the president. And I think there are good numbers because it's the same division that handles it. We are setting records in the numbers of passports that are being processed. Same group of people, so it shows that our systems are improving. And finally, we're looking at ways to infusing technology and AI to even further and rapidly increase that process even further, particularly for people. We're people who have had visas in the past, so we're just restoring visas. We can move even much quicker on many of those.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, but I want to look and see what you do, not just what you say, because when you talk about cutting budgets, talk about cutting personnel, talk about closing embassies and consulates, I don't know how you can increase the visa process or make it quicker.
There's no proposal at this time to close embassies or consulates. That's been media reporting because people like to leak lies, but there's no such work.
So that's not happening?
None are proposed, and I think I would know.
Know about it? Well, okay. Well, let's check that out and see where that information is coming from. If I could switch just a little bit to Afghanistan, you've heard a little bit about that. I introduced legislation to authorize the CARE Act, the Coordination for Afghan Relocation Efforts. You voted for that, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Mass voted for that. We called for this to be created and have an appointment made. I wonder, can you tell us what's happening with that to help us serve these Afghan refugees? Or are you wearing that hat too, or is there somebody else that you're going to appoint to that position?
Primarily the DHS responsibility for the intake of people into our country. I can certainly take that back and give you information on what progress they've made in that regard. But I will also tell you that one of the things we're tackling right now is we have to be able to properly vet anyone who comes into this country, given the mass migration events we've confronted over the last 3 years.
I suspect these people are vetted as much or more than just about anybody else coming into the country as refugees.
Well, some of them. They include dependents, and in many cases a higher level of vetting is necessary because they're coming from countries where we don't have a lot of information. Not every country keeps, including Afghanistan, has perfect records. Some of them, we know them because they've worked with us in the past. Others, we just have limited information on them.
So, but we are going to continue with this Afghan relocation efforts and this office, this CARE office. That's what you're committing to me?
Well, we're going to comply with the statutory requirements, but we also have to be more careful about who we let into this country.
Well, I didn't say that. I know we have to be careful, but I'm just saying we need to continue with that effort. You voted for it. Mr. Mass voted for it, but I don't see any progress on it. I hear just the opposite. So I appreciate that commitment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Mass, for holding this crucial hearing and allowing Secretary Rubio to highlight the overwhelming successes accomplished so far in the Trump administration. Secretary Rubio, thank you for being here today and for the incredible work that you and the department are doing. We're really proud of it. Thank you. I want to echo your opening statement. America is back. From bringing home hostages held in Gaza, initiating peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda, countering China's influence around the world, and much, much more, we are back. Thanks to the great work of President Trump and your great leadership, the United States is restoring its place on the world stage. No longer will the United States refuse to engage in foreign policy and diplomacy, but rather we will lead with peace through strength. I've traveled a lot recently via my various committees, including this one, throughout the continent of Africa. And one thing I've seen is that we've really neglected Africa. We have spent a lot of money and wasted a lot of money there, in my mind, with no strategic thought whatsoever into how we're spending this money. I have a question for you regarding South Africa. South Africa has withdrawn from America and our allies in recent years while increasing diplomatic relationships with our foreign adversaries, deepening cooperation with China, attacking our greatest ally, Israel, at the International Court of Justice, downgrading Taiwan's diplomatic presence, and condoning violence and race-based persecution against minorities. I fully support President Trump's executive order to bolster the administration's efforts in combating the egregious actions taken by South Africa. To support the administration's efforts, I recently introduced the U.S.-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act, which would conduct a full review of our relationship with the Republic of South Africa and allow for the use of targeted sanctions against corrupt officials in the African National Congress. Secretary Rubio, have you seen South Africa align with our adversaries like China, Iran, and Russia, and do you believe a full review of our bilateral relationship would be beneficial in the U.S.'s posture and strategy toward this country?
Yes, on your first two questions, and an interesting topic, and maybe even as we speak, the President is actually meeting with the President of South Africa, who requested that meeting, and it will be happening today. Obviously, I'm here with you today, otherwise I would be at that. So I imagine these topics will be raised there as well.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to my colleague, Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, in your opening remarks, you mentioned Syria and how sanctions relief was a necessary step to help Syria's interim authorities stave off imminent collapse of the country. Can you expand on how sanctions relief is being used to advance U.S. policy objectives, and also discuss potentially what conditions have been placed on Syria's interim authorities for that sanctions relief, including but not limited to things like protection of religious minority groups and counterterrorism cooperation?
Yes. Well, first of all, let me say that Syria is, in many cases, when it comes to stability, the most important country in that region. And the region will tell you this. If Syria is unstable, the region becomes unstable. So we have an opportunity now, hopefully, to see a government, we hope the formation of a government, then the only kind of government that can work in Syria is one that respects and includes all the different groups, which, by the way, that's one of the advantages of Syria. There is such a thing as a Syrian national identity, and you can build on it. It is identity that until recently included close cooperation with Alawis and Druze and Christians and Sunni and Kurds. It's been a society that's existed this way until Assad divided them against each other for his own purposes. A civil war broke out, ISIS erupted, foreign fighters poured in, and all kinds of instability ensued. So what we have now is a transitional authority led by some people that, frankly, have troubling previous histories. That said, they have no interest in war with Israel. They have no interest in becoming a playground to export revolution. What they want is to build a country. That is what they are claiming, and that's what we're willing to help them do if that's what they're serious about doing. So what sanctions relief, as has been proposed by the President, allows immediately is for partner nations in the region to be able to provide them the aid they need to do things like provide a government, provide municipal services, improve their telecommunication systems, all the sorts of things you need to build a nation state, and show the people of Syria there's a path forward towards progress. Our belief is failure to do that will quickly devolve into civil war. ISIS will grow in strength and power. Pro-Iranian groups that are being fomented will increase their activities to destabilize, and then you've got a big problem on your hands because